What would you say is the biggest lie people still believe when it comes to metabolic health?
I think the biggest and most dangerous lie is that fat is dangerous, and the fact that there are still low-fat products out there promoted as healthy. I think it's that simple because fat is the fundamental fuel. It's the one the body stores as a reserve. And throughout history, I believe that fat has always been the majority of our calories. And it's not until the recent era that we have made fat a bad thing and people start avoiding it. And I think that's a big part for the degeneration in health that we've seen in the last 50 years.
All right, well, let's really break this apart. What makes a good fat versus a bad one?
If we eat it the way nature made it, it is almost invariably, I'm sure someone can find an exception somewhere, but if nature made it, then it's a good fat. And if we mess with it, then it becomes a bad fat. It's really that simple. When we harshly process the seed oils, when we hydrogenate the oils and turn them into margarine, now they become frankenfoods, basically. So any animal fat that we eat directly with the animal meat or fish is excellent. And any fat that is minimally processed, like butter, cream, if we tolerate dairy, olive oil, which you can cold press. You just put a little squeeze on it and the oil comes out. Those are healthy oils. But when we have to start applying high heat and high pressure, and then we ruin the oils and they stink and taste horrible, and we have to deodorize them and degum them and send them through all these different processes to remove all the rancid flavors that they introduced in the processing. Now it's a frankenfood. We might as well eat plastic, basically.
Okay, talk more to the specifics of what those are, the seed oils. What types of oil?
So they call them vegetable oils, and it's most of the stuff that you find in the supermarkets. But there's basically soybean oil, which is the best seller in the US, which is a legume. Then there is canola, which is a seed, and then there is corn oil, which is a grain. So none of those are vegetables. They're plants, but they're not vegetables. But they put the vegetable label on there because now people think that this is something healthy. Because we've shifted the bias onto plants as something magical. It's like you can do no wrong. But those are the foods. And like corn only has a few % of oil in it. So you got to use all sorts of tricks to get the oil out of there. And for one thing, they use solvents even, like acetone. And traces of that acetone remain in the final product.
Somebody that says, okay, this is good to know, but I've been consuming them for years. What are they doing to the body that's so harmful?
They're just setting them up for it's just a piece of the slow degeneration. And that's the problem with all the things that we're talking about. For most people, these things don't kill us fast enough, right? If they knocked us out like an Ebola virus, people would pay attention. If they knocked us out like cyanide, we'd pay attention. But these things take 20, 30, 40 years, and therefore we have a hard time connecting them, right? But it's all the little toxins and the little overfeeding and the chemicals that become a piece in the puzzle for the metabolic poor health, the low-grade chronic inflammation that drives all degenerative disease.
I've heard talk of these oils when they're in the body getting incorporated and staying there for years. Is that true?
Yes.
And if so, is there a way to speed up the process of getting rid of them?
That's a good question. I don't know. It's more, as far as I understand it, it's mostly about competition. Like you're making new cell membranes all the time. And these cell membranes it's really the brain, if you think about it, because they decide that the brain has cells with cell membranes, and every organ, every cell in the body has a lipid bilayer cell membrane. And this is the most critical structure in the body because it decides what goes in and what stays out. So we very, very selectively allow things in. Just because we eat them doesn't mean that they're in the body. They're in a tube, and we very selectively agree to bring them across. And then in the cells, the process is even more sensitive than that when we're talking about signaling molecules and individual amino acids and all these different nutrients. And the cell is what allows for that selection, the proper selection of what comes across and what doesn't. And we need a good, healthy mix of fatty acids in that cell membrane. So we need cholesterol, and we need primarily, the most important ones are the DHA and the EPA. And we need a mix of other ones as well. But basically, the DHA and the EPA, those are very long, very distorted fatty acids. So the DHA is unsaturated in 6 places, and that makes it very crooked, very squiggly, and that pushes the molecules apart, and it provides flexibility and elasticity. The cell membrane becomes flowing, all right? And then the contrast to that is cholesterol and saturated fatty acids that we need to provide stability. So that there's a balance between stability and flexibility for that cell membrane to get the right signaling properties. But when we eat fats from nature, we get a good balance, especially if we eat fish on a regular basis. But when we start incorporating trans fats and hydrogenated fats and man-made fats and damaged fats, now we're incorporating all that damage into the cell membrane, and we're altering that natural balance.
Okay, so you brought up EPA, DHA. You brought up fish. Do you feel like to get enough of the EPA and DHA, we can do that through diet, or do we need supplements?
It depends on if you like fish. For people who don't eat fish, I would strongly suggest that you eat a significant amount of fish oil supplements on a regular basis. If you really like fish, then you don't need the supplements because they make the supplements from the same stuff that's in the fish. They just extract it from fish. But I would say if you eat a fatty fish 3 to 4 times a week, or if you really love to snack on sardines and things like that, then you're perfectly fine for most people. But then there's always individuality. We always process things differently. And the healthier you are overall, the less help you need, so to speak. And the worse your diet is, the more toxic you are, then that raises your requirements of anything that can help you.
When it comes to omega-3s, do you find testing is valuable? There's the omega-3 index, Biomega Quant.
I like to test. I don't think it's necessarily critical for most people if you do all those things. Like if you love fish and you're taking supplements, then you're probably fine, but I would still recommend a test. And we do one called BrainSpan, and it's a pretty comprehensive test. It measures all of the ratios and the presence. It's probably similar to the ones you measured, but what you can see there is, again, everyone's different. And if you have a lot of challenges to your health, if you have a lot of oxidative stress, and other things going on, then you may still not get enough. So by taking a test, now you can see what your status is. And they have shown, I don't remember the exact details, but they did a study where they gave people with a poor status, they supplemented them heavily for like 3 months or something, and their memory and cognition improved by 30%. So that is pretty significant, and that's the reason that we're talking about these fatty acids overall in brain health, because it will slow down the degeneration of the brain. That's one of the most important places where we need these fatty acids. So if we have a lack of it, that's where it's going to show up long term. And because one of the greatest concerns people have is dementia and cognition as they get older, memory loss, or even completely losing who they are.
For somebody only periodically having fatty fish right now, they'd like to include a supplement. What do they look for in a good supplement? There's algal oil, fish oils, krill oil, and then even within those, different qualities.
Yeah.
And then what supplement dosage could they start at?
I don't think there's any advantage to algae versus fish. Krill has a little bit of antioxidants in it, but it's also many times more expensive. And I think people need to be where they get somewhere around between 2,000 and 3,000 milligrams of the EPA and the DHA. Okay, not 2,000 milligrams of fish oil, because only a percentage of that may be the EPA and the DHA. So 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams of EPA and DHA. For most people, most fish oil is sold with a 2-to-1 ratio of EPA to DHA. And the EPA seems to be a little better at cardioprotective properties. So it tends to reduce inflammation a little bit more. The DHA tends to help brain and cognition a little bit more, because it's the most critical aspect of the membrane, the cell membrane that we just talked about. So a 2-to-1 is going to do well for most people, and that's how most supplements are sold. But if you're especially concerned about brain health or memory or one of those things, then you probably want to up the DHA a little bit.
One of the things you hear about when it comes to fish oil supplements is the rancidity. Is that something you've come across? And how do we avoid it if so?
There's no total way to avoid it, but I would recommend to buy reputable brands, and buy things that you kind of know have a high turnover, that you know they're not going to sit on the shelf forever. And then another good way, actually, that people don't realize how much temperature affects these things. So if you stick them in the freezer, and you can actually put cod liver oil. I haven't tried. I keep cod liver oil if I use it in the fridge, but you could probably even keep it in the freezer, because there's so much DHA in it that it doesn't freeze. What was the other thing you asked?
Just to know whether or not there's a problem with quality rancidity.
Yeah. So that's really the thing. Store it cold. As one example, if you grind up flaxseed, then it's going to start getting rancid within hours. And within a week, it's pretty nasty. But if you grind it up and stick it in the freezer, it's still good 6 months later. And the same thing with fish. If you keep it out in the open, it starts stinking in a day. It's pretty nasty. Whereas if you have it in the freezer, then it pretty much stays put.
What about toxicity of fish? You often hear the oceans are toxic. You can't consume seafood like we used to.
Yeah.
When it comes to supplements or eating whole food fish and other seafood, how do we look for non-contaminated?
It's absolutely a concern, and I've even done videos of that where I kind of rank them. So what you want to do is you want to eat small fish like sardines and young fish. And both sardines and mackerel and salmon are quite safe in this regard. Whereas one of my favorites, which is orange roughy, is not a fish that you want to eat for two reasons. It's not a fatty fish. It's a white, very, very tender fish. But the problem also is that even though orange roughy is a relatively small fish, it grows incredibly slow. Those fish are usually like 50 to 70 years old by the time you pull them out of the ocean, and they have a lot of time to accumulate waste. So that's why sardines are really like the ideal one, because they're harvested very, very young, and they're also of a species that doesn't accumulate much. Some of the worst ones are large and old and predatory fish, like swordfish. Those have extremely high levels. As far as supplements, I think they're very safe because supplements are very, very tightly regulated and tested. And as long as you stick with something that's a reputable brand that you know get tested, then, and a lot of those oils are typically what's called molecularly distilled, so that they only separate the good part.
Any concern when it comes to smaller fish, the fact that they come in cans, BPA, other things that might be leaching into them?
I think we got to focus on the big stuff. I mean, I have alerted people to the BPA issues, and I think we all need to be aware of those issues. But and for some people who are extremely sensitive and to anything toxic, they just react to everything, and their body is a mess, then maybe you want to be that granular. I think for most people, you try to do 90% right. And then you try to come up with a lifestyle that's sustainable, right? If you make it too hard, then you're not going to be able to follow through. But yes, everything matters. It's like toxins are one of the main things. We did a lot of work with toxins in my office when I was there, and I think it's super important. And the biggest problem we have in regulation of toxins is that they test them one at a time, right? So they do a study on mice, and they give them this one toxin, and they build it up to a dose called lethal dose 1, LD1, which means at this dose, 1% of the animals died, right? And then they treat it as if, well, what if you gave them two different toxins at the same time? Are we going to get 2% of mice die? No, because we already lowered their resistance. We already challenged them. So when you add a second part, almost 100% of the animals die, right? Because it's a strongly cumulative effect. And right now, we have somewhere like 5 to 10,000 chemicals, harmful chemicals, in our air, food, and water at any given time. So yes, we need to be smart about it. We need to drink filtered water. We need to avoid spraying our yards with all these chemicals. We need to minimize it and just understand that more isn't better, right? It's harming us to a degree, but then we also can't be like totally paranoid about it, because then that affects our emotional state, and we become afraid of doing just about anything. So It's like learn what you can and try to find a place where you do 90% right.
Okay, we opened up talking about fats, got into seed oils. Conventional nutrition advice is to consume them, and they're heart healthy. For people now that understand what you've been talking about here and the fact that we want to avoid these, likely they're going to consume more saturated fat, which again, conventionally we're told isn't good for us. So let's take it from the other end, saturated fats, and why that fear is actually something we shouldn't be worried about.
Well, we shouldn't be worried about it because it's a misconception from the very beginning. It was based on completely flawed data. I know you talked on your show about the Ansel Keys 7-country study, which is just totally absurd because they started with 22 countries and then they said, well, these 7 fit the premise that we're trying to prove. So let's just keep these 7 in the study and get rid of the other ones. That's not a study. That's outright falsification, and yet it was never caught. And then we have this, as humans, we have this intuitive sense. We don't intuitively understand biochemistry. We don't intuitively understand that glucose can turn into fat, but it can't go the other way around. We don't know those things. But when we pinch fat on ourselves and we know that that fat looks like the fat on the cow, we jump to conclusions and we understand. It seems like it would be very easy for us to eat that fat and it would end up on our body. So I don't think that I don't think it's any more sophisticated than that we ended up with really, really bad guidelines. And when early on, when they started analyzing these plaques, they found cholesterol in them. So they said, oh, well, then cholesterol must be bad because it's making these plaques. But this was also around the time where margarine and sugar was going through the roof, which we now know are horrible. They are the drivers of insulin resistance and fatty liver and cell toxicity. So anything that we do at the same time that we eat those 3 things is going to look bad. And interestingly, I mentioned this in a video recently that I forget the time frame, but from 1970 to 2009 or something like that, now they're finding more omega-6 fatty acids, in other words, seed oils, in the fatty plaques than ever before. So it's like the plaques are caused by insulin resistance and low-grade inflammation and oxidation, and whatever you eat at the same time is going to be incorporated in the plaques. They're not the cause of it necessarily. Except for, of course, the seed oils with the omega-6s, now we know that they're inflammatory, so they contribute to this.
Since you made it to the end of this clip, I know you're going to love the full episode. Click here to watch. I'll see you over there.
High blood glucose is one part of the problem. High insulin levels is a bigger part of the problem. High glucose causes swelling, microvessel damage, blindness, but high insulin clogs up